All right, how's it going? Welcome back to the Team O'Neill Rally School. This is just going to be a quick video about the basics of winch operation. We've seen a lot of funny stuff out there. The main thing is if you're off-roading, if you're driving ATVs and UTVs and that kind of stuff, being able to operate one of these things safely is the first priority, and being able to operate them sort of efficiently and be able to get what you need done with them kind of quickly is a wonderful thing. But some of the stuff, you know, just isn't safe, or it just isn't practical. So we're going to go through the real basics of this, sort of winch mechanics 101. When you approach a winch like this, whether it's on an ATV or a UTV, if it's yours and you've never used it and now you're stuck in the mud, if it's someone else's, whatever's going on, there's a few common things you're always going to find. It's typically going to be an electric motor, unless it's a big military vehicle with hydraulic winches and wreckers and stuff. We don't worry about that. It's probably going to be an electric motor on a regular spool drum winch like this. If you are stuck, we are not, but let's say we were, the first thing you're going to want to do is find the clutch. And this one, it's a nice easy throw lever right here, but basically with the clutch engaged, you cannot pull on this. With the clutch disengaged, I can now free spool this winch. What you're going to find is with that clutch disengaged, now the winch doesn't work, the motor turns independently of this drum. That's fine, but that's going to get you there. Most people, when they start out, maybe you don't know about this lever, and maybe you're like winching out to spool out your winch cable. Well, if you've got to go to a tree that's 100 feet away, you're gonna be there a long time. So whatever you're doing, when you get stuck, throw that clutch, and then you can drag this off as much as you need to get wherever you need to go with it. One really important thing to know about these: if it's not your winch, UTVs and ATVs, a lot of times you can't actually see this spool right here. You can probably tell, get a little bit of a close-up on some of the wraps on this drum. It's not particularly tidy. You've got pieces in here and other things that are going on. If I hook this up now to a lot of torque, what can happen is, you know, if I throw the clutch again and engage the motor, some of these wraps are going to end up biting down through, or you could end up with a big tangled mess, and that's not really what you always want. We're using synthetic cable. We could do a whole video on, you know, synthetic cable versus metal cable, metal braided cable. I think it's pretty well accepted that the synthetic cable like this has massive advantages. One of which is it's a lot safer to use, but also it's just more convenient. I don't need to wear gloves. I don't need to keep pressure on this thing. I can drop this line. If this were a metal cable, it would all just go brrr and turn into a big bird's nest of chaos in here right now. So don't worry about that. It could be a whole nother thing. Look it up if you want, but synthetic cable, most people are running these days. You can still run gloves, still good to have gloves. You know, up here in New Hampshire, it's kind of, you know, raspberry season, blackberry burrs and sticks or shrapnel or whatever you got might get stuck in here still. So you can run gloves if you want, but basically what you're going to want to do is when you get stuck, throw the clutch, pay out as much cable as you want. Another thing is going to happen here. And one thing that most people don't realize with a winch like this is a 10,000 pound winch. That means that it has 10,000 pounds of pulling force on the first wrap of cable on the drum, because the metal drum underneath all of this is much smaller. And if you think of, you know, mountain bike gears or anything else, as you build up the cable and this gets bigger and bigger, your winch is going to work faster but with less power. So if we were really stuck and you've got, you know, 100 feet of cable, you're going to want to pay out, you know, 90 feet of this cable to get down. Here, you can zoom in on this drum a little bit and you'll see what's going on. I'll just yank this cable off, because now every time I take a wrap off, you see that drum get smaller. That means you've got more and more pulling power, to the point where you're on the first wrap, which is going to be down here. And you can tell the last few, or actually it's just the last wrap on the drum worth of this cable is painted orange, so that I know if it's dark out and I get to here, I know where it's going to be, because you don't want to get to the point where there's only a few little layers over here, because the only thing that's holding that in is a little screw. You need this to be biting on that drum to be the most efficient. So it's good to pay out all of this cable if you can, if you need to, if you've got a really tough pull to do. The other nice thing about paying all that cable out is that if it was put on in a sloppy way and you tug hard on it, you won't end up with a permanent knot that is undoable, and you end up having to cut this off or do something else like that. So if you've got a tough pull, get all the way down to that first wrap. Now I've got 10,000 pounds. If I do another layer on this, now I've got, you know, 8,000 pounds. You can look up the math, but it drops pretty significantly every subsequent layer you put on this. Your winch is going to work faster, but it's not going to have nearly as much power. So that's definitely something to be aware of, especially if you're doing a pull that's, you know, for some reason I have to pull over here. What you're going to find happens is the cable all starts to build up on one side. When you're operating this hand controller, 99% of the time, down is going to be winch in, up is going to be winch out. Check the one you've got and see. But you'll see if I'm winching in at an angle, all of that cable is going to start building up on that one side, right? So now you've got a problem. And if you had to do this, you know, okay, go ahead. Maybe you've winched the vehicle ahead a little bit, but you're going to have to stop, hold the brakes, do whatever you can, and redress this winch, get it all back across here a little bit better, because it's not like some winches you see for industrial applications have like an auto feeder thing that goes back and forth and pays it back on here nicely. Recreational winches and off-road winches and stuff like that doesn't have any of that sort of thing. So go ahead and, you know, redress that winch appropriately if you need to. One thing, as you're out here working by yourself, it's a lot safer than if someone else has this controller. You know, if I'm out here alone, if you're out in the world alone and you're winching and doing stuff, that's fine. When you start working with other people, if you've got, you know, your buddy's inside and he's got the winch controller, minimum safe distance to this winch is a couple of feet. If you've got your hands on this cable and he decides to hit the winch in button and somehow something gets snagged, if you're in here trying to redress this winch and he sets the controller down in the cup holder and it bumps something and starts winching in, this is a huge source of big, terrible injuries off-road. And the further away you are from civilization and medical care and that sort of thing, it's not something that you want to be dealing with. So if you've got somebody in the vehicle, it's great if you trust them. It's wonderful that you trust them. But still, you know, a lot of times we'll have people just hold onto it like this. They don't even have their hand on the controller out the window to let you know that, hey, it's safe, go ahead and do whatever you want. If you're ever in doubt, if you're under stress, it's dark out, you're trying to winch this thing, things are happening, you've got to get your hands in here, just unplug it. Do what you got to do. Okay, fine, you redress the winch however you might need to, then plug it back in. So in this situation, I'm just going to go ahead and pull that cable back off, re-sort it out to a better, happier place, plug the winch in. You can see there's 3 prongs on here. It only lines up one way to plug that winch controller in, and then you're winching in. And when you are winching in, again, you're on your own, you're with somebody else, whatever you're doing, it's tricky, you're on your own. Minimum safe distance between you and that winch, fair lead and everything else is gonna be about 3 feet, you know? Because if I'm winching in, that's all wonderful. When I let off the switch, it still winches in quite a bit. And as those wraps build up on the drum, it's gonna be more and more. The time between when I let off the trigger and it's still winching in is about a foot of cable. And as it gets bigger and bigger, it's gonna be more than that. One really stupid thing that you can see that I'm already doing, I'm not worried about right now because it's just me, is look where my feet are. You know, if this vehicle is on a tilt, if things are moving, it's just a good habit to be in, not to get your feet bound up in these loops. Because if something happened where if I was like this and I start winching in, it's a 10,000 pound winch. If this vehicle shifts on some rocks, it's just get yourself in a safe position to be able to be doing this stuff. If you're ever in doubt, you know, there's no reason not to be this far away if you need to. And a very good habit to get into when you're handling this winch cable, even though it's synthetic, even though it's not going to gash my hands open like a metal cable might, even though I'm not wearing gloves, I'm still going to pay this cable back on hand over hand. I'm not letting it slide through my hands like this, because if it has picked up some kind of debris, a metal shard, a stick, thorns, who knows what, it's just not worth it. And it's that much easier to just know you're always going to be safe. The other nice thing is I can keep a lot more tension on it when I'm going hand over hand. You can see I can lean back into this and I can pay this cable on pretty nice and snugly. That means as I get into the second and third and fourth wraps on this drum, I know I'm not going to saw through the layers underneath. When I get to the end, it got a little weird where that's bolted on, so I'm just gonna set that down. Again, I'm not worried about it doing anything weird, but I'm just gonna slacken that up. I'm gonna actually turn it to the point of contention here that I didn't like. Get this stuff out of the way. Get that on there really nice the way I want it. One of the wonderful things about this synthetic rope is you can do that. And then I'm winching back in. So that's the fundamentals of operating the winch. Now that you've got kind of a grasp on how to do that and what you want to be looking for, there's a couple of different techniques that you're going to use to pull yourself out. If this Jeep is stuck, you're probably going to want to do a single line pull or a double line pull. A single line pull is exactly what it sounds like. You're going to find a hard object that you know isn't going to move. We've got in this case a tree strap. You're going to want to get a shackle, not a rock climbing carabiner, not some of the other stuff that you see out there. A proper shackle with a working load limit that's posted on it. This one is Chinese, but still it's got a working load limit of 4 3/4 tons. 4 tons is 8,000 pounds. 3/4 of a ton is 1,500 pounds. So as close as makes any difference to 10,000 pounds is a working load limit, which means its minimum braking limit's going to be a lot higher than that. Usually it's about double. That's wonderful with a 10,000 pound winch. It's only a 4,000 pound vehicle. Long story short, don't get the cheap little shackles. And we're just gonna hook this up to a tree and pull the Jeep forward. So a regular old single line pull on a UTV or an ATV, it's going to be exactly the same. Don't forget your hook or you got to make 2 trips. Find a suitable and acceptable tree. This one would be nice. It's bigger, but it's not really where I want to go. This one is okay. I'm not going too far. If I was really going to want to tug all the way up and over this hill, I might pick a different tree so I don't have to do this twice, but sometimes it's necessary that you got to get halfway and then get to another one, either because you don't have enough cable or it just doesn't make sense to go around a corner. But really simply, we can make this go quick. A tree strap like this, you want to go down as low as you can on the tree. You'll see some people, there's nothing really that wrong with doubling this around, as long as you get the distances about right. Realistically, you can just do this, and that way it'll equalize, and that way it's not going to sort of pinch and saw on the tree and kill the tree. A normal old shackle like this, simply unscrew it, put your 2 ends through, screw this back in. When you use these shackles, whatever kind of recovery you're doing, it's always best, screw it down tight, back it off a half turn. Because if this is screwed down tight and for some reason I put an enormous amount of strain on this and there is some flex, you'll never get it open. So screw it down tight, back it off a half turn. It's not going anywhere. It's still got all those threads are engaged. It's absolutely as strong as it ever was. Just because that pin is not loose, it's not going anywhere. If this were a metal line, I would beware of hooking it up like this. For a few reasons, one namely being a metal winch cable is going to store up a tremendous amount of energy. And if there is a failure, you don't want this cable flying up and out. So typically you're always connecting things like this. It's a good habit to be in regardless. With a synthetic line, I'm not worried about it. I'm not worried about this tree. It's we're in New Hampshire. That's a nice maple tree. It's more than sturdy enough, but we'll keep an eye on it if it starts to flex as we go. This has a working load limit that we're not even going to approach. Same with the shackles, same with the Dyneema rope. This is a 3/4 line. You always want to get stuff that it has the working load limit published on it. The minimum braking strength is 17,600 pounds. And there you go. So now we're hooked to that. So all I'm going to do is winch in this extraneous winch line that we don't need. I've done a sloppy job already. Now, if this were a really tough pull, like I said, you're going to want to find a tree that's further away so that you get down to those first few wraps on the drum, or you're going to want to do a double line pull, which we can talk about in a second, and I'll show you guys how to set that up too. But for right now, I'll probably fast forward this video. You don't actually want this in between your legs for obvious reasons. As it starts to go tight, you're just going to be aware of what's going on around you. Same thing in front and behind. When you're alone in the woods, it's totally up to you. When you've got 2 or 3 people, or the worst case scenario when you get something stuck is you've got 9 people standing around and everybody's got their idea of what to do, and somebody's running this and somebody's doing something else. Get in control of the situation and figure out what's going on. But a basic single line pull, if I'm going to get in this vehicle, I'm going to take my winch cable. A lot of times I'll run it under the wiper, something like that. Maybe I'll run around the mirror once or twice and in the window. We'll throw this crap out of the way. We'll talk about snatch blocks in a second. I don't need gloves right now. And I'm going to start the engine only because I need the alternator to be charging the battery. That's a big electric motor. It's going to be under a lot of strain. And as I go along here, I need the battery to be recharging to make up for the draw from the winch. All right, so starting this thing up, you know, if I'm stuck here, the first thing I'm going to do is leave it in neutral and winch in and see what happens. If I start moving under the winch's power like this, I'm going to say wonderful and let the winch pull me along until I'm in a position where I'm no longer stuck. What you find is maybe that's not working. Maybe we're in the mud and we need to spin our tires to help it just to get going. That's fine. But what you see a lot is if I'm spinning and shock loading that winch by falling backwards and sliding and hammering on it, it's not going to be particularly good. So we could winch our way up to this tree and then pay out the cable again, winch up to another tree, and drive all the way up this hill without actually driving anywhere. The cable is going to be building up on the left side of the winch right now. I know that that's happening, and I'm going to have to check on that before I get too far. But that's the way that it goes. You're never going to find a tree that's perfectly in front of you, and even if you do, the chances you'll ever get the cable to pay perfectly across the winch drum, that's kind of a hypothetical thing that they tell you in the manual, but it doesn't really happen. So that's that. I'm just going to winch myself back down. And that's a single line pull. That'll get you most of what you need to do. You're gonna do the same thing. Maybe you're not the one stuck, but you're the one that happens to have the winch. You know, here at the rally school, we get rally cars that get stuck in a ditch, go over a bank or something like that. And I've got a Jeep with a winch. If they're more stuck than you, the problem is the very stuck thing is going to drag you towards it. So all you need to do is take another tree strap or tow strap and hook the back of your Jeep to something. If you have the winch and you need to pull an obstacle or whatever it might be, strap yourself to a tree, a rock, other vehicles, daisy chain some cars together, a dumpster or whatever you got nearby, and you'll be good to go. One thing that's really handy, I can show you quick as well. these things tend to get damaged. Nobody carries a backup winch controller. It's just not something that happens. Maybe you lose this thing in the mud. Maybe it falls under the tire and gets run over. Maybe for some reason it breaks down. What you're gonna find is most of these only have 3 pins. One of those is going to winch you in, and the other one's gonna winch you out, and one's gonna be power. So if you look right here, what I can do is just with a simple Leatherman, I don't know which one this is gonna be. That's winch out. So you saw the drum winch out. So that means this is probably winching in. Jeep's moving. So if for some reason you run this thing over, this gets lost in the woods or something like that, or you've got a worn one, but this is a super winch or something like that, I'm just gonna take the pressure back off it. You can do that number. It's another reason why if you've got a winch on your vehicle and you leave it parked somewhere, do something. A lot of people will have a secret switch that cuts the battery power off to this or something like that. You know, the old joke is you'll leave your car somewhere and somebody wraps the winch cable around it and then winches in. And that's, yeah, don't do that obviously to anyone, but it's happened to people before. Or, you know, I could free spool this winch out to somewhere. This vehicle's locked, the security system's on, it's in gear, and I could winch that vehicle till the battery dies. But I can move that vehicle or do something else, and you've got to be careful about that if you've got a winch, because yeah, everybody kind of knows that trick. So just something to be aware of as far as security. Other than that, if you're in a situation where you're really stuck, you've got a big heavy vehicle, something really bad is going on where this isn't enough, and you can tell when it's not, if this engine is bogging down, if this starts to really get hot, it's warm now. Just from hardly being under any load at all. So you can winch, certainly, you know, 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off. You've heard of people running, you know, buckets of cold water and things to keep these cool if you're in a big hurry to get yourself winched out. But if you're in a hot climate and you're working these winches hard, give them a break, let them rest, do what you can. But if you need to, another way to double your pulling power essentially is to do a double line pull. And I'll set that up for you here sort of quickly, just so you can see what that's gonna look like. I'm gonna be using a pulley block. And again, it's all sort of theoretical math. It's a 10,000 pound winch. We're not gonna be on the first wrap on the drum, so that doesn't really matter. But what I'm gonna do is free spool the winch and take my snatch block back up to my tree strap, because probably my vehicle is still stuck and I need to do something different. So all that's gonna happen here is I can take this off. We don't need him anymore. He's gonna go back to the Jeep. I'm going to undo this, and what I'm gonna do is hook up this pulley block. And all I need to do is loop the cable through here, close it on itself, get that into here, and same thing, all the way down tight, back it off a quarter turn, and now I'm gonna run the other half of this. Let's see how this is gonna lay, just so that it works out nicely. We're fine. I'm running the other half of this back to the Jeep. All right, so one thing to be aware of, before we had a nice little system going, but the rope didn't move. The rope was stationary, and the only thing that was moving was the Jeep was sucking up the rope as it made its way along. Now, both of these ropes are going to be moving. This rope is going to be going uphill, and this rope is going to be going downhill, if I'm correct. No, this one's gonna go up, and this one's gonna go down. So if you were running these cables over a ridge, or over a rock or something, where before the cable would just rest on the ground and be no problem, now it's going to try to saw into a rock. You're more likely to damage these if you don't take measures against that, is all. So let's give this a try. The vehicle's still in neutral. I'm not going to bother starting the engine because we're not putting it under that much load. The clutch is engaged again. I'm going to winch in. So what you can see is now that's under a huge amount of load. If for some reason I were worried about a failure in this system, you've got to think about where you want to be standing, where you want people standing. If you've got a club event going on, there's a crowd of people, if you're overseas doing whatever you might be doing, if you've got dudes jumping over this or things are happening, get people out of the way, get people back in the woods. If this recovery point fails, if that snatch block fails, if this winch, you know, somehow has a problem, with steel cables, you're in a lot worse situation. With these Dyneema lines and things like that, you're not going to have too much of a problem, but always think about if there's energy stored in this system and there's a failure, where's it going to go? I don't want to be downrange of one of these projectiles if something happens. But let's winch in. What you're going to find is with a double line pull, I think I left it in gear, with a double line pull, the vehicle's gonna move half as fast, but with twice the force, or about twice the force, minus the amount of energy that gets absorbed by the bearings and the pulley block, or whatever you want to think about with that. So that's a double line pull, and it's very useful. It gets more cable off of the drum. It doubles your pulling power. I've got a second snatch block in the back of this Jeep right now. You know, I could run another snatch block here and then the line back out again. And you can do different things. You could make a triple line pull if you needed to. So you can really do a whole lot of different stuff with just the basic kit that you've got with you. You know, again, this is just a basic winch controller, tree strap, snatch block, good to go from there on out. Some of the other stuff is nice to have. You can do a lot of different things. You can redirect winch lines and do different things to get yourself around corners or where you can't find a good anchor point. In New England here, there's trees everywhere, so we're kind of spoiled. But if you're out west or if you're going overseas to different places, definitely you're going to be making recovery points, you're going to be burying stuff, you're going to be using other specialized equipment if you have that with you, and that's something to tackle as you get into it. But basic fundamentals of this thing and the safety should be pretty easy to understand, and hopefully you get out there and get to use one of these things without losing any fingers. And that's really all we're here for. If you're curious about more of this stuff, we can go as far down this rabbit hole as you guys want to. Again, this has already taken a little longer than we were planning on. Hopefully I can shorten this up a little bit in the edit, but it's all about just safe winch handling, using these things appropriately, efficiently, getting yourself you know, unstuck and moving again so that you're driving, because driving is a lot more fun than winching. So thanks for watching. If you're into this sort of thing, subscribe to the channel. We're putting stuff out all the time. If you got any questions about this or anything automotive, go ahead and leave it in the comments below and we'll get to it when we can. And yeah, visit us sometime at the Team O'Neill Rally School, teamo'neill.com. Usually we're driving fast and sideways, but we do a little bit of this stuff on the side too. So thanks again. We'll catch you next time.